There's a local word in Mindanao, takot-takot. It doesn't translate cleanly to English. It's not just fear. It's the kind of terror that lives in your chest long after the danger has passed, the kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m. with your heart hammering against your ribs, convinced that something is standing in the corner of your room watching you breathe. I learned that word from a Filipino scout who refused to go past a certain tree line. He pointed into the jungle, said, "Takot takot," and walked away from a paycheck that would have fed his family for 6 months. At the time, I thought he was superstitious. 3 days later, I understood he was smart. My name is Carter, and I'm going to tell you about an operation that cost the lives of good soldiers, shattered what I thought I understood about combat, and left questions that still haven't been answered 13 years later. The official report said equipment failure and hostile engagement. The official report is a lie wrapped in bureaucratic language and stamped with classifications that will outlive everyone who knows the truth. Before we go further, and trust me, you want to go further, hit that subscribe button right now. What I'm about to share comes from declassified documents, personal testimony, and memories I've spent over a decade trying to forget. This isn't entertainment. This is testimony. Let's begin. It was August 2012 when my team received the briefing. We were stationed at a forward operating base in Afghanistan, wrapping up a counterterrorism operation when we got pulled into a conference room with walls so thick you couldn't hear the generators running outside. That's when you know something unusual is coming down the pipeline. The intelligence officer who briefed us was a woman named Carrington, sharp eyes, sharper mind, and a demeanor that suggested she'd seen things that kept her up at night. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Gentlemen, we have a situation in the southern Philippines, Zamboanga Peninsula, specifically a 200-square-mile area of jungle in Mindanao that has become what we're calling a personnel black hole." She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her lit up with satellite imagery. Dense green canopy, the kind where you could hide an army and never find it from the air. Over the past 14 months, we've lost contact with 3 CIA assets, 2 ISR teams, and 1 full reconnaissance unit, 8 operators total. That's not counting the Filipino military personnel who've gone missing in the same area. We're looking at approximately 47 disappearances, all within the zone. She circled an area on the map with a laser pointer. The jungle looked like any other tropical forest. Thick, impenetrable, the kind of terrain that swallows sound and light and men whole. The local population has abandoned 12 villages on the perimeter. They won't say why. Our singles intelligence has picked up fragmentary communications suggesting Abu Sayyaf activity, but the patterns don't match known terrorist operations. The chatter is strange, coded in ways that don't align with any extremist communications we've previously intercepted. My team leader, a man we called Priest because of his unsettling calm under fire, raised his hand. "What's the primary objective?" Carrington's expression didn't change. "Intelligence gathering and asset recovery. We need to know what's happening in that jungle, and we need to extract any surviving personnel if possible. You'll be going in with minimal support, no air cover due to the density of the canopy and the political sensitivity of operating on Philippine soil. This is a ghost operation. If something goes wrong, we've never heard of you." That last part wasn't unusual for our line of work, but something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. "When do we deploy?" Priest asked. 72 hours. You'll be briefed on local conditions, emergency protocols, and exfiltration routes during transport. Questions? I had about 1,000, but the look on Carrington's face told me she'd already shared everything she was authorized to disclose. We left Afghanistan on a C-130 that flew so low over the Indian Ocean I could see fishing boats beneath us. From there, we transferred to a civilian helicopter that dropped us 40 miles from the target zone under cover of darkness. The insertion was textbook, silent, smooth, no complications. The jungle, though. The jungle was waiting. There's a quality to old jungle that you can feel in your bones before your conscious mind registers it. The air is thick, not just with humidity, but with something else, a weight, a presence. I'd operated in rainforests before, Colombia, Peru, Democratic Republic of Congo. This was different. We hit the ground at 0200 hours, 6 operators moving through the darkness like shadows with purpose. My kit weighed 70 pounds. Standard loadout, weapon, ammunition, communications gear, medical supplies, water purification, rations for 7 days. We expected to be in and out in 4. That expectation lasted approximately 6 hours. The jungle at night is never truly silent. Insects create a wall of sound so dense it becomes a kind of auditory camouflage. But as we moved deeper into the target zone, I noticed something odd. The insect noise wasn't consistent. It would stop. Completely. Just stop. As if someone had thrown a switch. Our point man, Rodriguez, held up a fist. We froze. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat, the slight rustle of someone's gear, the distant call of what I assumed was a night bird. Rodriguez was scanning the tree line ahead with his night vision optics, head moving in slow, deliberate sweeps. Then he lowered his fist, and we continued moving. This happened 4 more times in the first 3 hours. Each time, the jungle would fall silent, we'd stop, and then after a minute or two, the sound would gradually return, like an orchestra warming up after intermission. By dawn, we'd covered 8 kilometers and reached our first waypoint, a ridge overlooking the valley where the missing reconnaissance unit had last transmitted. We set up a temporary observation post and took turns on watch while the others rested. I drew first watch with a Marine attached to our unit named Kowalski. Good soldier, steady under pressure, had a habit of chewing gum that drove Priest crazy but improved Kowalski's focus. We settled into position behind a fallen log thick as a car, covered ourselves with camouflage netting, and watched the valley below through our optics. "You feel that?" Kowalski asked after 20 minutes. "Feel what?" "Like we're being watched." I did feel it, had felt it since we'd landed, but admitting that out loud seemed like opening a door I wanted to keep closed. "It's just the environment," I said. "New terrain, high-stakes mission, your nervous system is on overdrive." "Yeah," Kowalski said, but he didn't sound convinced. He popped another piece of gum into his mouth. "Yeah, probably." The sun came up slowly, filtered through layers of canopy so dense that even at noon the jungle floor remained in perpetual twilight. As the light improved, I could make out details in the valley below. There was a stream, silver in the morning light, large trees, some with buttress roots spreading 30 feet from the trunk, and movement. I adjusted my scope. Got activity, southeast corner of the valley. 5 individuals, civilian clothing. Priest crawled up beside me, pressed his own optics to his eyes. "That's not right." "What do you mean?" "Look at how they're moving. No tools, no weapons that I can see. They're just walking." He was right. The 5 figures were moving through the jungle in a loose formation, but they weren't cutting vegetation or following any visible trail. They seemed to drift between the trees like smoke. "Range?" Priest asked. I checked my optics. 600 meters, give or take. "We'll observe for now. Mark the location, log the time. We're here to gather intelligence." We watched the figures for 40 minutes. They never deviated from their path, never paused, never communicated with each other that we could see. Then they simply disappeared into a particularly dense section of jungle and didn't re-emerge. "That's our next waypoint," Priest said quietly. We moved at dusk, using the changing light to mask our approach. The valley floor was different from the ridge, wetter, with standing water in low spots and mud that tried to pull your boots off with every step. The trees here were massive, old growth that had probably stood for centuries, their canopies so high above us they seemed to merge with the sky. Rodriguez, on point, suddenly raised his fist again. We froze. He was standing at the edge of a small clearing, and even from 20 feet back, I could see why he'd stopped. The clearing held the remains of a village, maybe 20 structures, all built in the traditional style, bamboo walls, thatched roofs raised on stilts. But something was profoundly wrong with the scene. Every single building had been opened, not broken into, not destroyed, opened. The walls had been carefully removed and laid on the ground in neat arrangements. The contents of each home had been taken out and arranged in precise geometric patterns around the structures. Cooking pots, clothing, tools, furniture, all laid out as if for inspection. But there was no one there, no bodies, no signs of struggle, just this eerie, methodical arrangement of a village's entire contents spread across the clearing like someone had turned the place inside out and displayed its guts for examination. "What the hell am I looking at?" whispered Davis, our communications specialist. None of us had an answer. Priest signaled for a perimeter watch and indicated that he and I would do a closer investigation. We approached the nearest structure carefully, weapons raised, scanning for any sign of threat. The items arranged on the ground weren't just placed randomly. There was a pattern, though I couldn't decipher it. Larger objects formed outer rings, smaller items spiraled inward. In the exact center of each pattern was a single piece of fabric, usually clothing, laid flat and smooth. I knelt beside one such arrangement, my knee sinking slightly into the damp earth. The clothing at the center was a child's shirt, bright yellow, with a faded cartoon character I didn't recognize. It had been placed with obvious care, smoothed out so there were no wrinkles. "Carter," Priest's voice was low, controlled. "Look at the walls." I stood and moved to where he was examining one of the removed bamboo walls. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. The bamboo hadn't been cut or broken. It had been unwoven. The lashings that held the structure together had been carefully untied, and the bamboo poles had been separated and laid out in parallel lines, perfectly straight, exactly 6 inches apart. "How long would this take?" I asked. "Hours, many hours. And it's like this for every building." Priest straightened up, scanning the village again. "This wasn't a raid or an attack. Someone spent days doing this." "Or something," Davis said from his position at the perimeter. Nobody corrected him. We photographed everything, took samples of the soil and fabric, and marked the location in our GPS. The sun was setting, painting the clearing in shades of orange and red that made the scene look even more surreal. That's when we found the first body. Rodriguez found it while doing a sweep of the village perimeter. He didn't call out, didn't make a sound, just raised his hand with 2 fingers extended, the signal for personnel spotted. We converged on his position with weapons ready, moving through the arranged belongings like we were navigating a minefield. He was pointing at something beneath one of the elevated structures. At first, I thought it was a pile of discarded clothing. The light was fading, and the space under the stilted house was deep in shadow. But as I got closer, the shape resolved itself into something that made my throat tighten. It was a body. Male, maybe 30 years old, wearing what looked like the remnants of Filipino military fatigues. He was positioned on his back with his arms at his sides, legs straight, like someone had posed him for a funeral. But that's not what made my hands start to shake. Every visible inch of his skin was covered in cuts, not random slashes or defensive wounds, precise, deliberate incisions, maybe a 1/4 inch deep, running in parallel lines across his arms, his face, his neck. The cuts were so uniform they looked like they'd been made with a ruler and a surgical blade. They covered him completely, turning his body into a canvas of scar tissue and dried blood that had formed intricate patterns I couldn't begin to understand. "Jesus Christ," Kowalski whispered behind me. Priest moved closer, knelt beside the body. He pulled a penlight from his vest and examined the wounds carefully, professionally. These weren't done all at once. Look at the scarring. Some of these are weeks old. Some are days old. Some are, he paused, leaning closer, some are hours old. "What are you saying?" I asked, though part of me already knew. This wasn't torture. This was done over an extended period, with medical attention to keep him alive. Look, no signs of infection despite the tropical environment. The wounds were treated, kept clean. He sat back on his heels. Someone was keeping him alive while they did this. Davis was scanning the area with his rifle, his movements jerky with tension. "We need to extract, right now. This is way beyond our operational parameters." "Agreed," Priest said, standing. "We document, we mark the location, and we get to the exfil point. Command needs to see this before they send anyone else in here." But Rodriguez was still staring at something. "Boss, there's more." "More bodies?" "No, come look at this." He led us to the far edge of the clearing where the jungle began again. At first, I didn't see what had caught his attention. Then he pointed his light at a tree trunk about 20 feet away. There were marks carved into the bark, deep gouges that formed symbols or letters, I couldn't tell which. But what made my stomach drop was that the carvings were recent. Fresh sap still gleamed in the cuts, reflecting Rodriguez's light like amber. "Can anyone read this?" Priest asked. We all studied the marks. They didn't look like any alphabet I recognized. Not Arabic, not Tagalog, not Chinese. The symbols were geometric, angular, and they seemed to repeat in sequences like a mathematical formula. "Wait," Davis said. He had pulled out his camera and was taking photos. "Look at the pattern. It's repeating. Same sequence every 7 symbols." He was right. Whatever language or code this was, it had structure. That meant intelligence. That meant intent. "Photos only," Priest ordered. "Don't touch anything. We're leaving in 5 minutes." That's when the jungle went silent again. But this time it was different. This time the silence felt intentional, targeted, like something had closed its hand around the entire valley and squeezed until even the insects were too afraid to make noise. Kowalski raised his weapon, scanning the tree line. "We've got movement, multiple contacts, perimeter, all sides." I could see them now, shapes moving between the trees, just at the edge of visibility. They were using the fading light and the dense vegetation to mask their approach, but they weren't being particularly careful about it. That worried me more than if they'd been sneaking. It suggested they didn't think they needed to hide. "Count?" Priest asked, his voice steady. "At least 12, Rodriguez reported. "Could be more. They're not advancing, just watching." We formed a defensive circle, backs together, weapons oriented outward. Standard procedure for when you're outnumbered and surrounded. But this didn't feel like a standard tactical situation. The figures at the perimeter didn't move. They just stood there, barely visible in the gathering darkness. I tried to make out details through my optics, but the low light and distance made it impossible. All I could determine was that they were roughly human-shaped, and they were absolutely, completely motionless. "This is Shadow 6 to any listening station," Davis said into his radio, keeping his voice low. "We have a hostile situation and need immediate extraction. Grid coordinates follow." He rattled off our position, then waited for a response. Static. He tried again. "Shadow 6 to base, do you copy? We need immediate extraction." More static, but this time it was punctuated by something else. A sound that might have been a voice, might have been electronic interference, might have been something trying to mimic a human voice without quite understanding how. Davis's hand was shaking as he lowered the radio. "Comms are compromised." "Backup channels," Priest ordered. Davis cycled through every frequency we had. Same result. Static, laced with that almost voice, that uncanny sound that made my teeth ache. "We're on our own," I said. Priest nodded once, a sharp motion. "Standard evasion protocols. We move to secondary exfil point. Stay in cover. Avoid contact. If they follow, we engage only if there's no alternative. Understood?" We all acknowledged. The figures at the perimeter still hadn't moved. "Rodriguez, you're on point. Head north. Keep us in the thickest cover you can find. Move out." We left the village in tactical formation, weapons up, senses stretched to breaking point. The figures watched us go. I could feel their eyes, if they had eyes, tracking our movement. But they didn't follow. Not yet. We moved through the jungle for 3 hours before Priest called for a short halt. We were exhausted, running on adrenaline and training, and we needed to check our bearings and hydrate. We found a small depression between 2 massive tree roots and set up a minimal defensive position. I was on watch with Rodriguez while the others took 5 minutes to rest. The jungle had returned to its normal cacophony of insect noise, which should have been comforting, but somehow wasn't. Normal had become abnormal. Silence had become the expected state. "You ever seen anything like this before?" Rodriguez asked quietly. He was from Texas, had deployed 4 times before this, had seen action in some of the worst places on Earth. But his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "No," I admitted, "nothing close." "That body, those cuts, someone spent weeks making those marks. Why? What's the point?" I didn't have an answer. The patterns on the dead soldier's skin had been too precise to be random torture, too extensive to be practical interrogation. It was like someone had been writing on him, using his body as paper. "And those symbols on the tree," Rodriguez continued, "I got a good look at them before we left. They reminded me of something." "What?" He hesitated. "You ever see photos of crop circles? The complicated ones, the geometric patterns that people argue about whether they're hoaxes or not?" "Yeah." Those symbols had that same quality, mathematical, like they were describing something complex, not random, not decorative, functional. Before I could respond, Kowalski hissed from his position. Movement, east side, closing slowly. We all went still. I scanned the darkness with my night vision, and my blood went cold. They were back, the figures, but now I could see them more clearly, and what I saw made no sense. They were human in shape, but wrong in proportion. Arms slightly too long, legs that bent at angles that weren't quite right. They moved with an odd gliding motion, like they were on rails instead of walking. And they were all wearing the same thing, loose, dark clothing that hung on their frames like funeral shrouds. There were 8 of them that I could see, arranged in a semicircle about 50 meters out. They weren't advancing, just standing there in perfect formation, perfectly still. "They found us fast," Davis whispered. "Too fast. We were careful with our trail." Priest was observing them through his scope. "They're not looking at us. Look at where their heads are oriented." He was right. The figures' heads weren't pointed in our direction. They were all tilted slightly upward, as if they were staring at the canopy above them, or listening to something we couldn't hear. Then, in perfect unison, they all tilted their heads down and looked directly at our position. "That's not possible," Kowalski said. "There's no way they can see us in this cover, in this darkness." But they could. I knew it with the same certainty I knew my own name. Whatever these things were, they could perceive us in ways that had nothing to do with conventional sight. One of them raised an arm, pointing at our position. The gesture was slow, deliberate, mechanical. The other 7 all turned to orient on us, still maintaining their formation. "We're leaving," Priest said. "Now. Fast and quiet protocol is over. We move with speed. Go." We crashed through the jungle at a pace that would have been reckless under any other circumstances. Branches whipped at our faces, roots tried to trip us, vines caught on our gear. Behind us I could hear movement, not crashing like we were making, but something else, a rustling, sliding sound, like fabric being dragged across leaves. They were following, and they were faster than us. "They're gaining," I shouted. Rodriguez, still on point, suddenly veered left toward a break in the vegetation. We followed without question, trusting his judgment. We burst through into a small clearing with a creek running through it, maybe 15 feet wide. "Water masks scent and thermal," Rodriguez gasped. We followed the creek, maybe we lose them. It was sound tactics. We splashed into the water, which came up to our knees, and started moving downstream as fast as the current and rocky bottom would allow. The cold water was actually a relief after the humid heat of the jungle, but I couldn't enjoy it. Every nerve in my body was screaming that we were being herded, that we were running exactly where something wanted us to run. We followed the creek for maybe half a mile before it opened into a wider stream. The canopy here was less dense, allowing moonlight to filter through and illuminate the water. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Priest held up a fist. We stopped, water swirling around our legs, weapons raised. The sliding sound had stopped. The jungle was quiet again. "Did we lose them?" Davis asked. Nobody answered. We were all listening, watching, waiting for the ambush we knew was coming. It came, but not in any way we expected. The water around our legs started to move. Not the current, that was still flowing downstream like it should. This was something else. The water began to swirl in small vortices around each of us, spinning faster and faster until it was frothing white in the moonlight. "What the?" Kowalski said to say. Then the water exploded upward in a geyser that knocked us all flat. I went under, my head striking a rock, stars bursting behind my eyes. I came up gasping, disoriented, my weapon torn from my hands by the force of the water. The others were in similar states, drenched, scattered, weaponless, or struggling to keep hold of their gear. We scrambled for the bank, survival instinct overriding tactical thinking. That's when I saw them, standing on both banks of the stream, at least 20 of them now, those two long arms hanging at their sides, heads tilted at that unnatural angle. They had surrounded us completely, and they were all holding knives. We hauled ourselves onto the bank, trying to form some kind of defensive position. I'd managed to keep hold of my sidearm, and Priest still had his rifle. The others were scrambling for their scattered equipment. The figures didn't advance. They just stood there, forming a perfect circle around us, those knives catching the moonlight. The blades were crude, looked like they'd been chipped from stone rather than forged from metal, but they were sharp. I could tell from the way the edges gleamed. One of them stepped forward. This one was different from the others, taller, with something wrapped around its head that might have been a headdress or might have been something else. It raised its knife and pointed it at Priest. Then it spoke. I can't adequately describe the sound. It was like someone had recorded human speech, broken it into individual phonemes, and reassembled them in the wrong order with the wrong emphasis. The words were English, I'm certain of that, but they came out twisted, stretched, inflected in ways that made my ears hurt. "You see pattern, yes?" Priest, to his credit, didn't hesitate. "We see it. What do you want?" The figure tilted its head further, impossibly far, until I thought its neck would snap. Want. Want is not word. Need. Need is word. Need, show. Need, teach. Need, transfer. "Transfer what?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The figure turned to look at me, and that's when I finally saw what was under the wrappings around its head, or rather, what wasn't there. Where eyes should have been, there were just smooth, scarred-over patches of skin. Where a nose should have been, just more scar tissue. The mouth worked, but wrong, like the muscles underneath didn't quite connect properly. "Transfer, pattern," it said. "Pattern in blood, pattern in bone, pattern in meat. We show, you learn. All learn. All become pattern." Kowalski had recovered his weapon and was aiming it at the figure. "Stay back, I'm warning you." The figure looked at him, or at least turned its eyeless face in his direction. "Warning. Warning is past concept. You already warned. 14 cycles passed. You ignored warning. You continued. Now." It made a sound that might have been laughter. 14 months, Davis whispered. "It's talking about 14 months ago, when the disappearances started. You took our people, the soldiers, the civilians. What did you do to them?" "Took, no. Invited, showed, pattern. Some learned. Some," it gestured with the knife, "some became pattern. Body holds truth when mind refuses. Skin remembers what thought forgets." That's when I understood what we'd seen carved into the dead soldier's skin. They were trying to communicate something, to transfer some kind of information. And when the person wouldn't or couldn't understand through conventional means, they literally carved it into flesh. They were using human bodies as storage media for whatever they were trying to convey. "We're leaving," Priest said firmly. "Stand aside." Leaving is incorrect choice. You carry eyes that see, ears that hear, minds that process. You are qualified recipients. You will learn pattern. You will spread pattern. "Like hell we will," Kowalski snarled. The figure made that awful laughing sound again. Hell. Hell is interesting word. Describes place of punishment, yes? Place where rules change, where normal becomes abnormal? It swept its arm in a wide gesture, encompassing the jungle around us. "You already in hell. Hell is here. Hell is pattern. You just now noticing." Priest raised his rifle. "Last warning. Let us through or we engage." For a long moment, nothing happened. The figures all stood motionless, those crude knives held ready but not threatening. The jungle held its breath. Even the water seemed to stop flowing. Then the tall figure nodded, a too-sharp motion. "You choose difficult path. Acceptable. Difficulty makes pattern stronger. Resistance makes transfer deeper." It stepped back, and the circle of figures parted, creating an opening. "This is a trap," Rodriguez said. "Trap implies deception," the figure said. "This is invitation. You go, you run, you think you escape, but pattern follows. Pattern waits. Pattern has infinite patience. 14 cycles, 1400 cycles, makes no difference to pattern." "Move," Priest ordered. "Formation Delta, watch our 6. We moved through the gap in the circle, weapons trained on the figures as we passed. They didn't follow. They just watched us go with their eyeless faces, heads tilted at those impossible angles. We made it maybe 20 steps before Davis spoke. "Guys, my arm." I turned to look. He had his sleeve rolled up, staring at his forearm in the moonlight. There, carved into his skin in those same precise parallel lines we'd seen on the dead soldier, was a pattern. Fresh blood was welling from the cuts. "When did that happen?" Kowalski demanded. "When did they cut you?" "I don't know. I didn't feel anything. It's just there." We all checked ourselves frantically. Kowalski had marks on his neck, Rodriguez on his shoulder blade, visible through a tear in his uniform that I didn't remember seeing before. Priest had them on his left hand. I rolled up my own sleeves with shaken hands. There, on my right forearm, were the cuts. Shallow, precise, forming a pattern I couldn't decipher. They didn't hurt. That was almost the worst part. They should have hurt. "How?" I whispered. Behind us, that awful laughter echoed through the jungle. "Pattern transfers in many ways. Knife is slowest. Water is faster. But best way is permission. And you gave permission when you looked, when you tried to understand. Understanding is doorway. You opened door. We walked through." We ran then. Tactics abandoned, formation broken. We just ran through the jungle like animals fleeing a fire. Behind us, that laughter followed, not getting closer, but never getting farther. A constant reminder that something was behind us, something that could move through the jungle faster than we could, something that had already marked us in ways we didn't understand. We ran until exhaustion brought us down, collapsing in a small ravine as dawn began to break through the canopy. We were miles from the creek, miles from the village, but I knew with absolute certainty that distance meant nothing. They had marked us. We carried their pattern now, carved into our skin like a brand. Priest was checking his GPS, trying to get our bearings. Secondary exfil point is 8 clicks northwest. If we push hard, we can make it by 1400 hours. And then what? Davis asked, staring at the marks on his arm. We get extracted? We go home? We pretend this didn't happen? These things are on us, in us. They said the pattern transfers. We get extracted, Priest said firmly. Then we report everything to command and let them figure it out. That's the mission now. Survive and report. But Rodriguez was shaking his head. You heard what that thing said. The pattern has patience. 14 months ago this started. That means there are people who got out, people who got marked and made it home, and the pattern is still spreading. The implications of that settled over us like a shroud. If this was true, if whatever these things were had been marking people for over a year, and those people had been extracted, had gone home, how many bases did the missing personnel cycle through? I asked. How many debriefings, how many medical examinations, where doctors and nurses would have seen these marks? Nobody answered. We didn't need to. We all understood what we were facing now. This wasn't just about surviving the jungle. This was about quarantine. This was about making sure whatever had been carved into us didn't spread any further. We need to document everything, Priest said quietly. Every detail, every encounter, every symptom. If we're carriers, if we're compromised, then command needs to know exactly what they're dealing with. He looked at each of us in turn. And we need to accept the possibility that we don't make it out of debriefing, that we might be spending the rest of our lives in a containment facility somewhere. The sun was fully up now, painting the jungle in shades of green and gold. It looked peaceful, beautiful even. But I could see the marks on my arm, still fresh, still bleeding slightly. And I knew that what we were carrying was far worse than any biological weapon, far more dangerous than any conventional threat. Because the pattern wanted to spread. That's what it did. That's what it was designed to do. And we were about to bring it home. We barely made it 2 kilometers before Davis collapsed. One moment he was moving normally, the next his legs just gave out and he went down hard, face first into the mud. We all rushed to his position, forming a defensive perimeter while Priest checked his vitals. Heart rate elevated, breathing shallow. Davis, can you hear me? Davis's eyes were open, but they weren't focused. He was staring at something we couldn't see, his pupils dilated so wide the iris was almost invisible. His lips were moving, forming words without sound. He's in shock, I said, checking his pulse. It was racing, fluttering under my fingers like a trapped bird. Kowalski was scanning the jungle around us. We can't stay here. If those things are tracking us— They don't need to track us, Rodriguez interrupted. He was staring at his own arm, where the cuts had been. Look. The pattern had spread. What had been a small collection of marks on his shoulder blade now extended down his arm, in branching lines, like veins or roots growing under his skin. The new marks weren't cut, they were just appearing, dark lines forming beneath the surface, following some internal logic we couldn't comprehend. I checked my own arm. Same thing. The original cuts were still there, but now there were these shadow lines spreading themselves across my skin in geometric progressions. They didn't hurt. That was still the most disturbing part. They should have hurt. It's not spreading randomly, Priest said quietly. He had his sleeve rolled up, examining the patterns with the clinical detachment of someone trying very hard not to panic. Look at the intervals, the way the lines branch. It's following the circulatory system. Not exactly, but close. Like it's using our blood vessels as a template. Davis suddenly convulsed, his back arching off the ground. His eyes rolled back, and he started making a sound. Not words, not screaming, just this rhythmic, repetitive vocalization that made my skin crawl. It sounded almost like counting, like someone reciting numbers in a language that had too many consonants. "Hold him down," Priest ordered. "Don't let him bite his tongue." We restrained him as gently as we could while his body seized. The episode lasted maybe 30 seconds, though it felt longer. When it passed, Davis went limp, his breathing evening out. But his eyes, when they focused again, were different, clearer, almost unnaturally bright. "I understand," he whispered. "Understand what?" I asked. "The pattern. I can see it now. It's not random, it's a map." "No, not a map. A pathway, a set of instructions." He grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Carter, it's trying to show us something, something important, something that changes everything. Davis, you're not making sense. Just stay calm. We're going to get you out of here." "No." His grip tightened painfully. "You're not listening. The pattern isn't a weapon. It's not trying to hurt us. It's trying to communicate. Those things in the jungle, they're not attacking us. They're desperately trying to make us understand something before it's too late." Kowalski was backing away, weapon raised. "He's compromised. Whatever's happening to him, it's in his head now." Priest pulled Davis's hand away from my arm, but his expression was thoughtful. "Before it's too late for what, Davis? What are they trying to tell us?" Davis's eyes were streaming tears, but I couldn't tell if it was from pain or emotion or something else entirely. "They're not from here, not from the jungle, not from Earth. They came through something, some kind of breach, and they're trying to close it. But they can't do it alone. They need biological anchors. They need consciousness that can bridge between—" He trailed off, his face contorting in concentration. "I don't have the words. The concepts don't translate. But it's in the pattern. If we could just read it properly." "This is exactly what they want," Rodriguez said sharply. "They get inside our heads, make us think we're helping them, make us spread the pattern voluntarily. It's textbook psychological warfare." "Is it?" Priest asked. "Think about what we've seen. The village, everything arranged in those precise patterns. The body with the cuts covering every inch of skin. Those figures following us but not attacking. What if they're right? What if this isn't an attack? Then why the secrecy?" I demanded. "Why the disappearances? Why not just communicate normally?" Davis had closed his eyes, his breathing becoming rhythmic. "Because normal communication failed. They tried for decades, centuries maybe, appearing to villagers, trying to explain through stories and warnings and dreams. But humans didn't listen, couldn't listen. The concepts were too foreign, too far outside our framework of understanding. So they adapted. They developed a new method, direct neural inscription. The pattern bypasses language, bypasses cultural context. It writes directly to the subconscious mind." "That's insane," Kowalski said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Priest knelt beside Davis, studying his face. "Davis, if what you're saying is true, if they're trying to prevent something, what is it? What's the threat?" Davis opened his eyes. The pupils were still dilated, but there was lucidity there. Terrible, unwanted lucidity. "The breach is getting bigger. Every year, every month, it expands. And things are coming through. Things that make those figures in the jungle look friendly by comparison. They're the warning system. They're the immune response. And we've been treating them like the disease." We held position in that ravine for 2 hours while we argued about what to do. Priest wanted to continue to the extraction point as planned. Rodriguez agreed. Kowalski was in favor of finding a way to remove the marks, even if it meant field amputation. Davis insisted we needed to go deeper into the jungle to find the source of the pattern and understand it fully before we left. I was somewhere in the middle, my mind racing through the implications of every option. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," I said, interrupting another round of heated discussion. "Davis is claiming that these entities are trying to warn us about something worse that's coming through some kind of dimensional breach? And the pattern, these marks spreading across our skin, is their method of communication because we're too stupid to understand them any other way? That's reductive, but essentially yes, Davis said. He was sitting up now, his back against a tree, looking more coherent than he had since the collapse. The patterns on his skin had stopped spreading, at least visibly. The breach is somewhere in this jungle. That's why the disappearances are concentrated here. That's why the villages were abandoned. The locals could feel it, even if they didn't understand what it was. A wrongness, a thinness in reality. And you know this how? Rodriguez challenged. Because you had a seizure and now you can read magic alien hieroglyphics? Because I can see it, Davis said simply. He held up his arm, where the patterns had spread from his wrist to his shoulder. Not with my eyes, with something else. It's like, imagine you've been looking at a picture your whole life, thinking it was just random dots, and then suddenly someone gives you glasses that let you see it's actually a detailed photograph. That's what this is. The pattern isn't being imposed on us, it's being revealed to us. It was always there, written into the structure of reality itself. We just couldn't perceive it before. That's great philosophy, Kowalski said, but it doesn't change the fact that we're marked, we're compromised, and we have a mission to complete. We extract, we report, we let people with more resources figure this out. There's no time, Davis insisted. Don't you understand? The breach is accelerating. What's coming through isn't going to wait for bureaucratic procedures and committee meetings. By the time command mobilizes a response, it'll be too late. We're here now. We have the marks now. We're the only ones who can do anything about it. Priest had been quiet through most of this exchange, but now he spoke. Davis, I need you to be very clear about something. If we go deeper, if we follow this pattern to wherever it leads, what exactly are we going to find? Davis's expression became troubled. I don't know. The pattern shows me the path, shows me the urgency, but it doesn't show me the end point. That's still blocked, still protected by something. But I know we need to see it. I know that if we don't, if we just extract and file a report, then everything that's happened here, everyone who disappeared, everyone who died, everyone who was marked, it'll all be for nothing. I found myself checking the patterns on my own arm again. They had continued to spread while we talked, thin, dark lines branching under my skin like a circuit diagram. I tried to feel if they were affecting my thoughts, influencing my decision-making, but how could you tell? How could you know if your thoughts were your own when something was literally rewriting the neural pathways in your brain? We vote, I said. That's the only fair way to do this. We're all compromised to varying degrees, so we all get a say. Priest nodded. Agreed. We vote on whether to continue to extraction or follow Davis deeper into the zone. Majority rules. I'll go last. He looked at Rodriguez. You first. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. Extract. We're not equipped for this, mentally or physically. We need support. We need backup. We need people who understand what we're dealing with. Going deeper is suicide. Kowalski? Kowalski was still staring at Davis like he was a bomb that might go off at any moment. Extract. I don't trust any of this. For all we know, the pattern is making Davis think he understands, when really it's just scrambling his brain. We go deeper, we end up like those missing soldiers, dead or worse. Carter? I looked at each of them in turn. Rodriguez, solid and practical. Kowalski, paranoid but reasonably so. Davis, potentially compromised, but also potentially the only one seeing clearly. And Priest, waiting for my decision before making his own. We go deeper, I said, and I saw surprise flash across their faces. Not because I trust the pattern, not because I believe Davis completely, but because of what we saw at that village. Someone spent days carefully, methodically arranging everything. That's not aggression. That's not madness. That's communication. And if there's even a chance that Davis is right, that something worse is coming, and these entities are trying to warn us, then we have a responsibility to see this through. Priest studied me for a long moment. Even if it means we don't make extraction? Even if it means we might not make it back at all? Especially then, I said. Because if we leave now and it turns out Davis was right, we'll spend the rest of our lives knowing we could have done something and chose not to. I can live with dying. I can't live with that. Priest looked at Davis. How far? Maybe 10 clicks, due west. There's a place where the jungle becomes different. That's where the breach is. That's where we need to go. And you're certain about this? I'm not certain about anything, Davis admitted. But the pattern is pulling me in that direction. It's like a compass needle pointing north. I couldn't ignore it even if I wanted to. Priest stood, checked his weapon, adjusted his gear. Then we go deeper, but we go smart. Standard infiltration protocols. We maintain comms discipline, we document everything. And at the first sign that this is a trap, we abort and fight our way to extraction. Agreed? We all nodded. Even Rodriguez and Kowalski, though they looked deeply unhappy about it. One more thing, Priest said. He pulled out his combat knife and held it up. If any of us becomes too compromised, if the pattern takes over to the point where we're a danger to the others, we deal with it. Immediately. No hesitation, no sentiment. This is bigger than any individual. Understood? We understood. In our line of work, you made peace with the possibility of hard choices long before you ever needed to make them. We moved out heading west, deeper into the jungle, following whatever strange compass Davis had gained from his communion with the pattern. The sun was high overhead now, filtering through the canopy in shafts of green-gold light that would have been beautiful if I wasn't so terrified. The jungle around us began to change about 3 kilometers in. At first, the changes were subtle. The trees seemed older, more gnarled. The undergrowth became denser, forcing us to cut our way through with machetes. The insect sounds shifted in pitch, becoming lower, more resonant, almost harmonic. Then we started seeing the structures. They were everywhere once you knew to look for them. Arrangements of stones in precise geometric patterns. Vines trained into complex knots. Trees that had been encouraged to grow in spirals and helices that couldn't be natural. Someone or something had been shaping this jungle for a very long time, turning it into a 3-dimensional message we were only beginning to read. This is like a cathedral, Rodriguez whispered. Everything is arranged, everything has meaning. Davis was moving faster now, his eyes bright with fevered intensity. The patterns on his skin were glowing faintly, emitting a pale phosphorescence that was visible even in the dappled sunlight. We're close. Can't you feel it? The air is different here, thinner, like we're at high altitude even though we're barely above sea level. He was right. I was breathing harder, and it wasn't just from exertion. Each breath seemed to take more effort, as if the air itself was becoming less substantial. We emerged into a clearing that made the village seem mundane by comparison. It was roughly circular, maybe 100 feet across. The ground was covered in concentric rings of stones, each ring made from a different type of rock: black volcanic stone, white limestone, red clay, green serpentine. The patterns were so precise they had to have been measured with instruments, yet they looked ancient, worn by years of rain and growth. In the center of the rings was a pool of water, not muddy jungle water, but water so clear it looked like liquid glass, and the pool was perfectly round, perfectly still, despite the breeze that was moving the leaves around the clearing. But what drew my eye, what made my breath catch in my throat, was what was above the pool. The air was wrong there. It rippled and twisted like heat shimmer, except this was different. Colors bled through from somewhere else, hues I didn't have names for, shades that hurt to look at directly. And through the distortion, I could see shapes, structures, a landscape that definitely wasn't the Philippine jungle. The breach, Davis breathed. That's it. That's what they've been trying to show us. The figures were there too, dozens of them, arranged around the clearing's perimeter. They weren't threatening us, weren't even looking at us. They were all oriented toward the breach, standing in formation like soldiers on guard duty or like worshippers in a church. The tall one with the eyeless face stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from multiple directions at once, as if the jungle itself was forming the words. You came, unexpected, hope rekindled. You see pattern now, yes? You understand purpose? We see it, priest said carefully, but we don't understand. What is that thing? What's coming through? The figure tilted its head. Thing. Thing implies singular entity. What comes through is multiplicity, is ecosystem, is reality with different rules. It bleeds through because barrier thins, because this place, this exact location, is where two realities press closest together. Why here? I asked. Why this specific spot in this jungle? Not coincidence, is consequence. Old places hold power. Ancient rituals performed here. Blood spilled here. Beliefs concentrated here. Collective consciousness creates weight. Weight creates pressure. Pressure creates weakness in fabric of reality. And what is weak eventually tears. Davis was walking toward the pool, drawn like a moth to flame. How long has this been happening? Centuries of your time, but accelerating. The breach opened slowly at first, then faster. 500 years to grow from pinprick to hand width. 50 years to grow from hand width to door width. 5 years to grow from door width to gate width. Soon will be whole width, then collapse width, then no width, because width implies boundaries, and when boundaries fail completely, width becomes meaningless concept. What happens when it collapses completely? Kowalski asked. The figure made that awful laughing sound. Reality itself becomes negotiable. Physics becomes suggestion rather than law. Gravity, time, causality all become fluid, mutable. What is solid becomes liquid. What is liquid becomes concept. What is concept becomes truth. This location becomes zone of chaos that spreads outward at increasing speed, first encompassing jungle, then island, then archipelago, then hemisphere, eventually everything. Jesus Christ, Rodriguez whispered. And you've been trying to stop it? Priest asked. That's what all this is about. The patterns, the marks, the disappeared soldiers? Stop? No. Cannot stop. Can only delay. Can only warn. The figure gestured to the other beings around the clearing. We are remnants, survivors of previous attempt. We came through breach when it was smaller, when passage was still possible. We volunteered to serve as warning system, as alarm bell, as last chance for indigenous reality to defend itself. Volunteered? I repeated. You're saying you chose to come through? To get trapped on this side? Trapped implies desire to leave. We have no such desire. This is sacred duty, most noble calling. We exist between realities to prevent contamination of either. We are necessary sacrifice. Davis had reached the edge of the pool. He was staring into the water, his face illuminated by whatever life was bleeding through from the other side. It's beautiful, he whispered. I can see patterns in everything, mathematics underlying all existence, connections between consciousness and matter, formulas that describe how thought becomes reality. Davis, step back from there, Priest ordered. But Davis wasn't listening. He was transfixed, his hand reaching toward the water surface. If I could just touch it, if I could just make contact, I'd understand everything. The pattern would be complete. I could see how to... No, the eyeless figure moved with impossible speed, crossing the clearing in a blur and striking Davis's hand away from the water. Contact is forbidden. One drop, one molecule transferred, and you become vector, you become doorway. This is how contamination spreads. Davis stumbled back, the spell broken. He looked at his hand, then at the figure, confusion and hunger warring on his face. But I need to understand. I need to... Need to is trap, the figure said harshly, is addiction. is how the other side captures consciousness. It offers complete understanding, perfect knowledge, unity with fundamental patterns of existence. But price is dissolution of self, is becoming part of collective consciousness that exists beyond breach. You cease being individual, you become we, and we is hungry. We always wants more. I felt cold despite the tropical heat. The disappeared soldiers, the ones who went missing, did they? Some died, some fled, some went mad, some were absorbed into pattern against their will. The figure paused, and some chose absorption willingly, seduced by promise of transcendent understanding. We tried to stop them. We failed. Their individual consciousnesses now exist on other side, calling to others, trying to convince more to cross over. This is why communication is so difficult. This is why we must use patterns carved in flesh. Normal language is compromised. Normal thought is compromised. Only direct inscription bypasses corruption. So what do you want from us? I demanded. We're here, we see the breach, we understand the threat. What are we supposed to do about it? The figure turned its eyeless face toward me. You must carry warning. You must return to your people and make them understand what is coming. Authorities must quarantine zone, must prevent anyone else from finding this place, must establish protocols for identifying those who have been exposed, and most important, it paused, as if gathering courage, must prepare for possibility that containment will fail, that breach will continue expanding until intervention becomes necessary. What kind of intervention? Priest asked. The permanent kind, the kind that ensures contamination cannot spread beyond point of origin. You understand what this means, yes? You understand price of true containment. We understood. It was talking about sterilization, about destroying the breach so completely that nothing could come through, which would mean destroying everything in a radius around it, the jungle, the villages, anyone who had been marked or exposed, including us. There has to be another way, Rodriguez said, but his voice lacked conviction. Other way would be welcomed, the figure said. Other way is why we mark, why we teach, why we inscribe pattern on those who will listen. Perhaps somewhere in transferred knowledge is solution we have not found. Perhaps human consciousness, so different from ours, will see answer we cannot see. This is hope, slim hope, but hope nonetheless. Davis was still staring at the breach, his face wet with tears. How long do we have before the collapse becomes irreversible? Unknown. Acceleration is exponential. Could be years, could be months, could be days. Signs would precede final collapse, spatial distortions, temporal anomalies, spontaneous appearance of matter from other side. When signs begin, evacuation must happen immediately. Hesitation means contamination. Contamination means spread. Spread means end of reality as you understand it. Priest was photographing everything. The breach, the pool, the stone circles, the figures. Building a record that command would have to take seriously. We need to get this information out. If what you're saying is true, if the threat is real, then every moment we delay is a moment closer to catastrophe. Agreed, the figure said. You should go. Should leave now while path is still clear. We will continue vigil. We will maintain barrier as long as possible. But you must warn others, must prepare your species for what is coming. What about you? I asked. If the breach collapses, if the sterilization happens, you'll be killed along with everything else. The figure made a sound that might have been a sigh. This is acceptable. This is purpose. We are already dead in all ways that matter. We exist in between, in nowhere place, serving function that has no glory and no reward. Death, when it comes, will be mercy. Will be release from duty that has lasted too long and cost too much. There was something profoundly sad about that statement, something that cut through all my fear and confusion and touched a deeper place. These beings, whatever they were, had given up everything to stand guard over a catastrophe that wasn't even their fault. They were volunteers in a war that would never be won, could only be delayed. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. The figure tilted its head in that way that suggested surprise. Gratitude is unexpected. Gratitude is pleasant. Perhaps hope is not so slim after all. Perhaps consciousness that offers gratitude is consciousness that can find solutions. It gestured toward the edge of the clearing. "Go now. Path will be clear for 1 hour. After that, we cannot guarantee safe passage. The other side grows active at night, grows hungry, grows bold." We didn't need to be told twice. We made it to the secondary extraction point with 40 minutes to spare. The helicopter came in low and fast, military efficiency that was comforting after everything we'd experienced. The pilot's face showed no emotion as we climbed aboard, but I saw him notice the marks on our skin, saw his hand move unconsciously to his sidearm. "Quarantine protocol," Priest told him. "We're contaminated. Command has been notified. Take us directly to containment facility. No stops, no exceptions." The pilot nodded, and we lifted off, the jungle falling away beneath us. I watched it recede, that green expanse hiding horrors that most people would never know about, would never believe if they were told. Davis was slumped against the bulkhead, exhausted but lucid. The patterns on his skin had stopped glowing, but they were still there, still visible, still spreading in their slow geometric progression. "Did we do the right thing?" he asked quietly. "Walking away, leaving them there." "We did what we could," Priest said. "We gathered intelligence, we made contact, we got the warning. Now it's up to command to decide how to proceed." "And if they decide wrong?" Rodriguez asked. "If they don't take it seriously, if they write this off as mass hallucination or psychological warfare, then we go public," I said. "Leak the photos, leak the testimony, leak everything we have. Force them to take it seriously by making it impossible to ignore." Kowalski laughed, a bitter sound. "You really think people will believe us? You think anyone will look at pictures of a shimmering pool in a jungle and accept that reality itself is tearing apart?" He had a point. The evidence we'd gathered was compelling to us because we'd been there, we'd seen it, we'd felt it. But to someone looking at photos and reading reports, it would sound impossible. It would sound like an elaborate hoax or a mental breakdown. Unless the patterns meant something. Unless Davis's seizure and sudden understanding pointed to something real and transferable. "Davis," I said, "the pattern, what you learned from it, can you write it down? Can you translate it into something others can understand?" He looked at his arms, at the marks spreading beneath his skin. "I don't know, it's not like learning a language. It's more like remembering something you always knew but had forgotten. I'm not sure I can explain it to someone who doesn't have the marks." "Try," Priest ordered. "That's your mission now. Document everything you experienced, everything you understood, in as much detail as possible. If the pattern contains solutions, we need to extract them before—" He trailed off. "Before we're locked in quarantine forever. Before we're eliminated as potential contamination vectors, before whatever is spreading through our bodies reaches our brains and we stop being us entirely." The helicopter flew us to a military base I didn't recognize, landing on a pad surrounded by armed personnel in hazmat suits. We were separated immediately. Different vehicles, different containment cells, different teams of doctors and interrogators. I lost sight of Davis, Rodriguez, Kowalski, even Priest. That was 6 weeks ago. I'm recording this testimony from my quarantine cell, a 10 by 10 room with concrete walls and a door that only opens from the outside. The patterns have continued to spread. They cover my arms completely now, spreading across my chest, down my legs, creeping up my neck toward my face. They don't hurt. They still don't hurt. But they're changing me. I can feel it. My thoughts are becoming more ordered, more geometric. I see patterns in everything, in the grain of the concrete walls, in the intervals between meal deliveries, in the questions the interrogators ask. Everything is connected. Everything has meaning. Everything is part of a larger structure I'm only beginning to perceive. They tell me Davis is dead. Suicide, they say. He saw something in the pattern that broke him, made him realize something that couldn't be endured. I don't believe them. I think Davis saw something that terrified them, some truth that command decided was too dangerous to let exist. Rodriguez and Kowalski are in cells near mine. I can hear them sometimes through the walls. Rodriguez prays every night, long streams of Spanish punctuated by sobs. Kowalski has stopped talking altogether. He just sits in his cell, staring at the mark spreading across his skin, watching himself transform into something else. Priest is still being interrogated. I know because they keep asking me questions about him, about his behavior, about whether he seemed compromised. They're looking for reasons to classify him as unreliable, to discredit his testimony, to bury everything we reported. And maybe they're right to do so. Maybe we are contaminated beyond redemption. Maybe the marks spreading across our bodies are turning us into vectors for something that shouldn't exist in this reality. Maybe the kindest thing would be to eliminate us and everything we touched, scrub the whole incident from the records and pretend it never happened. But I don't think so. I think the eyeless figures in the jungle were telling the truth. I think there really is a breach, really is something coming through, really is a catastrophe building toward a tipping point that will change everything we know about reality. And I think we, the marked ones, the contaminated, the volunteers in a war we didn't choose, are humanity's only chance to understand what's happening before it's too late. The patterns show me things now, even in this cell. I see the structure of the building, see how it connects to other facilities, see the flow of personnel and information. I can perceive the decision-making processes, the classifications being applied, the directives being issued. And I understand, with growing certainty, that command has already made their choice. They're going to sterilize the zone. Probably already have, given how long I've been in here. A classified military operation, carefully contained, officially attributed to something mundane. The jungle will burn. The breach will be destroyed. The eyeless figures who volunteered to stand guard will finally find their release. And we, the 6 who went into that jungle and came back changed, will disappear into black sites and classified files, our testimony buried under layers of secrecy that will outlast our lifetimes. But this recording will survive. I've made copies, hidden them in places that will be found eventually. Someone will listen. Someone will understand. Someone will carry the warning forward when we can't. Because the breach wasn't unique. The eyeless figure said this was where realities pressed closest together. But close isn't the same as only. There are other thin places, other points of pressure, other breaches forming, expanding, preparing to collapse. And when they do, when reality itself becomes negotiable and the barriers between worlds fail completely, humanity is going to need people who understand the patterns, people who have been marked, people who can perceive the structure underlying existence, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to reinforce it before everything unravels. I hear footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, moving with purpose. This might be the last time I can record, the last chance to get this testimony out into the world. If you're hearing this, if you found this recording, then you need to know. The threat is real. The breach is expanding. And the time for skepticism is over. You need to find the thin places. You need to identify the marked ones. You need to prepare for a reality that doesn't follow the rules you think you understand. And most importantly, you need to remember that sometimes the things we perceive as threats are actually warnings. That sometimes the monsters are trying to save us, not destroy us. The eyeless figures in the Philippine jungle gave up everything to stand guard over a catastrophe. The least we can do is honor that sacrifice by taking their warnings seriously. The door is opening. They're coming for me now. Remember this. Takot takot. Not just fear. The kind of terror that changes you forever. Because that's what's coming. And we're not ready. Make sure you're subscribed because there are more stories like this. Classified operations, buried testimonies, and truths that powerful people don't want you to know. Hit that notification bell, share this video, and remember, reality is thinner than you think.